Hello, this is Dr. Stephen Long, or Mr. Dr. Long, as I have students call me, and this is Masterpieces of British Literature 1, or English 3327, Section 1. In this short video, I'll introduce you very quickly to a timeline of major events that connect closely to British literature between the composing of the great epic poem Beowulf on one end, around 750 AD, all the way over to the year 1800, where the material for this class culminates. I have uploaded this document on your Blackboard course homepage under the title Historical Timeline Awareness Document. So again, if you want to, you do not have to look at my face. You can pause this video, upload the document, and follow that document along as I cover it. I call this a time awareness timeline. And what I would like you to do is download the document and save it in your files. And then as you read historical background assignments or you read primary source assignments, you can fill in the extra entries in the timeline in between these major events. But what I want you to do is think about a timeline as something kind of tangible that you can orient yourself around, like a landscape. It's like a chronological landscape. And I want you to get used to this idea that events are occurring in chronological order and they have an effect on one another, and they change future events throughout history. The better aware you are of these historical events, the easier it will be for you to position texts and historical events along that timeline and help you kind of remember them. So the earliest event is around 750 AD, when Beowulf, the great epic poem Beowulf, was composed. It's included in British literature because it's the earliest form of English. It wasn't an English that was written or composed in England or on the island of Britain. It was probably written or composed somewhere else, either on the European continent or in a northern European geographical area. It only mentions events in England in the poem. But Beowulf is Old English, and it directly connects historically to our English language, and that's why we include it. You'll notice that the second item on the list is the first Viking raids of England. This is where some of these Norlanders or Norselanders were sailing ships and conducting military raids on England. This has a profound effect on England and on the English language. In fact, it imports a large element of English as we know it into England, and this is how English emerges. In the years 871 to 899, we have the reign of King Alfred. King Alfred was one of the manliest men of all time. He was a very accomplished scholar, as well as a very accomplished leader and military leader. He managed to unite England militarily against the Viking raids and rid England of the Vikings. Very important figure. We jump clear over to 1066, and this is a very profound moment in the history of the English language, the Norman conquest of England. The Normans were French, and they spoke a French dialect, and when William of Normandy took over the throne of England in 1066 after the battle of after the Norman conquest, the French language dominated the upper classes, the ruling classes, and it was the language of the land in terms of the official language. And so the French language ends up becoming infused deeply into the English language. after the Norman invasion. So the history of languages, of the English language, is most profoundly changed after the Norman conquest. We jump about 300 years to 1348 when the Black Death ravages Europe. Think about the Black Death as being kind of like the coronavirus, only highly infectious, only people were very, very likely to die a horrible death if they contracted the bubonic plague or Black Death. It's possible that the Black Death killed at least a third of the population of Europe and England after 1348. This has a profound effect on social relationships, economic relationships, the way people saw themselves in terms of their individual identities. It has a profound effect. It allows us to have Geoffrey Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer is someone who survives after the Black Death and takes over some of these leadership roles and some of these important roles that he would not have been able to have had England not suffered this massive depopulation. Someone had to do it, and some of these commoners, these people that did not necessarily grow up in the landed gentry, had to take over some of these roles, and Chaucer, being a very intelligent person, managed to do that. It allows us to have this figure who's has an extreme literary talent, and he's also has access to different social classes, and he's able to describe these people from these different social classes. As a result of the Black Death and this massive depopulation, in 1381 you have what's called the People's Uprising, and it takes control of London before being suppressed. But what happens with the People's Uprising is when you have this massive depopulation with the bubonic plague, with the Black Death, you have a massive labor shortage. And all of a sudden, these laborers who used to have no leverage at all in British culture, all of a sudden they can demand higher wages because there's no one to do the work. They have some control in the situation, and it's a huge shift in wealth redistribution, and also it shakes up the social order significantly. This lays the groundwork for Geoffrey Chaucer and his Canterbury Tales. Chaucer's a fantastic poet, and he's fantastic, in my opinion, because he's so detailed. He describes people in such fine levels of detail. And for historians and people who want to understand historical situations, he is an absolute goldmine. In 1470, I put Sir Thomas Malory on my list in his composing of the Morte d'Arthur in French. Malory introduces the Arthurian myth, and the Arthurian myth is with us today. It is such a powerful mythology, such a powerful cycle of stories. It keeps getting repeated and repeated all the way down to the present age, still extremely popular. 1476, William Caxton introduces the first printing press into England. This has an enormous effect on what gets printed, how widely something gets printed, how powerful someone can be, and how influential they can be. All of a sudden, people can spread ideas extremely quickly to large populations and control public opinion. It's a lot like the introduction of social media today. Had that kind of an effect. We have Christopher Columbus, 1492, the accession of Henry VIII in England in 1509, introduces England as a politically and religiously separate country from what was before a Catholic dominated world. Henry VIII stands up to the absolute power of the Pope, and he breaks the absolute grip the Pope has on power. In 1517, Martin Luther submits his Wittenberg Theses, inaugurating the Protestant Reformation. And again, this fractures the culture of Europe religiously and culturally and politically. It's the beginning of pluralism, where people are allowed to follow their own beliefs and their own conscience, according to their own conscience. They did not have to be dictated to what religious reality was or religious truth was. Luther begins that process. Elizabeth I accedes to the throne of England in 1558. This begins a profound period in England in terms of its self-confidence as a country, its sense of identity as a country. Henry VIII probably united England as much as any of the monarchs of England, but Elizabeth had this profound, almost cult-like following, and England becomes has a kind of religious devotion about it, and she inspired an enormous amount of cultural identity in England. Elizabeth dies in 1603. James I takes the throne, and one of the huge contributions that James I makes to the history of English literature is that he orders the creation of the King James Bible. We probably even know what that name is. The King James Bible comes from King James, who commissioned that work. It was written, translation created by 47 scholars from Oxford and Cambridge. And it's a language we still know today or hear today in our ears. Still the most read book in English in history. In 1642, there's an outbreak of civil war in England. People are calling into question the absolute power of the monarchy, and Charles I, who is the monarch at the time, is actually executed. He's beheaded, and a commonwealth or a protectorate takes over, led by Oliver Cromwell. This lasts for about 11 years, and Cromwell himself is executed, and Charles II is restored to the throne of England, and that's why we call this the Restoration period, the Restoration of England. And Charles II takes over, and this has, a profound effect on literature, because Charles II brings in a culture of openness and urbanity and feelings of that it's okay to take it easy again. He liked to be entertained, and with Charles II comes the introduction of what's called Restoration drama, which is some of the most playful and funny and sort of naughty kind of literature that we have in English literature. For me, it's absolutely entertaining and very, very clever. Charles II introduces that. Along with this sort of openness to new kinds of literature or new kinds of entertaining literature, we also have a very significant rise of science. And in the second half of the 1700s, we have a couple of figures that are extremely important. Isaac Newton, who publishes the Principia Mathematica, sort of unifies mathematics and physics and allows educated people to begin to see the universe as understandable. This is an extremely important period when people seemed to think it was possible to make sense of how the whole universe worked. John Locke publishes his essay concerning human understanding in 1690. He, like Newton, is a man of science, and he wants to create a system that makes nature and the human mind as understandable as possible in its simplest terms. Locke and Newton have a stranglehold on the intellectual world for the next 120 or 130 years. They are the most powerful, most influential figures in intellectual and political culture in the next 120 years. Without John Locke, we don't have the U.S. Constitution, for example, which is based on Locke's philosophy of government. In 1700, we have the death of John Dryden. Dryden dominated literature and theater for about 40 years prior to his death. In the 1740s and 1760s, we have the development of electricity, and we have the invention of the steam engine by James Watt, who lived from 1736 to 1819. And we have the application of the steam engine in the first factory manufacturing developed by Matthew Boulton. This has an enormous social consequence in England. It creates an enormous demand for cheap labor, and it begins automating human life. You have the development of trains, factories, you have air pollution, you have mass production occurring for the first time. Jumping forward to 1789, French Revolution. You actually have a king executed, you have an overthrow of a royal, and you have the introduction of a new form of government, or potential of a new form of government in democracy, where people can take the reins of power away from royals, from people who believe themselves divinely appointed leaders. The French Revolution has a profound effect on the Romantic poets like William Blake, William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and as we approach 1800, what we see are these Romantic ideas, these notions of human perfectibility, of democratizing the world population, the excitement of that taking over for some of these poets. And that's what they're writing about, this enormous sense of human potential, a Romantic sense of human potential and human perfectibility. And that's where we end in 1800. Once again, I am Dr. Stephen Long, your instructor for Masterpieces of British Literature 1. If I can make this video clearer or make it in a way that would be more helpful for you, please let me know by sending me an email, slong2@central.uh.edu. Please stay tuned for further instructional videos and have a happy and healthy day. Thank you very much.